Anguished families stay awake around the clock awaiting news about their sons, the 43 students who went missing on September 26th in the southern Mexican state of Guerrero. For their classmate, Omar Garcia, that unforgettable night began with a terrifying phone call.
De repente me llama un compañero que había ido, dice, oye, nos están balaceando, ya mataron a un compañero.
His classmates had seized local tourist buses and traveled to the nearby town of Iguala. As they do every year, they planned to ask for donations there. They needed the money to travel to Mexico City to participate in an annual protest march commemorating a 1968 student massacre. This time, the students of the rural teachers' school in Ayotzinapa were in real danger. Omar left everything he was doing and quickly went to Iguala.
Llegamos, vimos los autobuses destrozados con impactos de bala, las llantas ponchadas, la sangre en el piso, en los pasillos de los autobuses.
¡Ya mataron a un compañero! ¡Ya mataron a uno! ¡Ya mataron a uno, Carlos!
That night, Omar Garcia witnessed the violence.
¡No queremos armas! ¡Necesitamos una ambulancia!
And says there were 3 bloody attacks that would leave at least 6 people dead. 3 of them were his classmates.
Pero tire el arma, pues. ¿Que acaso hay narcotraficantes aquí?
Después, como a las 2 horas, empezaron a llegar medios de comunicación, reporteros también, y de repente, como a las 12:30, otra vez la balacera contra la multitud que estaba ahí, contra reporteros, maestros, estudiantes. Fue una masacre fuerte, muy fea, inhumana, donde ahí sí perdieron la vida 3 compañeros.
Omar Garcia was in Iguala that night and survived the attack. He's come to the nation's capital hoping to draw attention to this heart-wrenching case. He visits a well-known national radio station, and for nearly an hour, journalists interview him about the situation in Guerrero State.
Por ejemplo, esa noche, cuando después de los disparos nos rendimos, dijimos, no, pues venimos desarmados y todo, la gente se dio cuenta, los policías se dieron cuenta, sometieron a los 40 o más de 40 compañeros y los metieron a las patrullas. Y nosotros pensábamos, bueno, mañana los sacamos, pasado mañana, bajo fianza, los cargos que les quieran meter, por lo que sea, pues nos liberamos. Pero nunca nos esperábamos que los desaparecieran.
The killings and forced disappearances that took place that night in Iguala have created powerful political shockwaves in Mexico. The case of the 43 missing students from Ayotzinapa, Guerrero, has become the major crisis of the Peña Nieto administration, and it's raising major questions about this nation's ability to deal not only with the violence organized crime brings, but also with corruption at all levels of government. Across this nation, massive protest rallies have erupted, the aim to pressure Mexico's federal government to solve this case.
Bueno, venimos a reclamar el esclarecimiento sobre los compañeros caídos de Ayotzinapa. Queremos que el gobierno nos diga qué ha hecho con ellos y que nos los entregue vivos, porque vivos se los llevaron y vivos los queremos.
Estamos apoyando a todas las familias que ya perdieron a sus hijos y a las que todavía tienen la esperanza de verlos vivos, que vean que no están solos, que estamos en contra del gobernador, en contra del presidente de Iguala y en contra de nuestro presidente.
The mounting political pressure has already forced the governor of Guerrero State, Ángel Aguirre, to step down from office. According to federal justice officials, criminal violence in Guerrero State has grown during Aguirre's administration. Now, 4 of Mexico's most violent drug cartels operate in the state. Aguirre has a history of holding office when tragedies strike Guerrero. In June 1995, while he was interim governor, a bloody massacre left 17 indigenous farmers dead. Another 21 people were seriously injured. Federal law enforcement officials in Mexico say this latest case reveals what many had long suspected, that local government officials are collaborating with criminal organizations. The mayor of Iguala, José Luis Abarca, and his wife, María de los Ángeles Pineda, were arrested on November 4th. They're charged with ordering Iguala police to shoot at protesters, killing the 6 people, and for the forced disappearances of the 43 students. Mexico's top law enforcement official says Iguala's former mayor told city police to hand the students over to a criminal organization called Guerreros Unidos.
Con las declaraciones obtenidas, las investigaciones realizadas, los peritajes hechos, lo acontecido el 26 de septiembre en Iguala constituyó una represión violenta por parte de los policías de Iguala y Cocula, dirigidos por el grupo delincuencial, que ya está muy señalado, con la intención de disuadir a un grupo de personas a hacer presencia en el evento de celebración que el alcalde y su esposa estaban realizando esa noche en Iguala con motivo del informe de la segunda.
Iguala's chief of police, Felipe Flores Vázquez, remains a fugitive from the law. Meantime, the Mexican government's investigation continues. Forensics experts have discovered several clandestine grave sites around Iguala, the first one filled with 28 bodies of victims that had been burned beyond recognition. Officials later said the remains do not belong to the missing students. Other common graves have been uncovered, but authorities appear to be no closer to solving this mystery. Since his schoolmates went missing, Omar has already made more than 10 visits to Mexico City. But he knows that he's competing for the government's attention again. In an entirely separate case, these protesters are demanding the return of their leader, who they say was kidnapped. Always optimistic, Omar believes something good for Mexico will eventually come from the case of his missing classmates.
Ahora no hay miedo, la gente está manifestándose por todas partes, porque lo que pasó con nosotros como Ayotzinapa el 26 de septiembre es algo que les ha pasado a todos.
But for the families of the missing men, the long wait for news on whether they are alive or dead has been exhausting. CCTV spoke with 2 of the fathers of the disappeared. Emilio Navarrete's son, Jose Angel, is among the missing. Mr. Navarrete says he last spoke with his son the night police opened fire on the students.
¿Qué sucede? Dice, no, pues nos están agrediendo los policías de aquí de Iguala, dice. Y pues a mi amigo ya le pegaron en su cabeza y está tirado. Entonces le digo, no, pues hijo, trata de correr o cúbrete, ve la forma de escapar, le digo. Ponte listo, le dije. Pues fue lo último que le dije y se cortó la llamada.
After that phone call, Navarrete says he's not been able to sleep much. He and Melidon Ortega, whose son is also missing, joined dozens of other parents and scoured the hillsides around Iguala, searching for the missing students.
Nosotros, a raíz de eso, nosotros hemos actuado, hemos estado, hemos recorrido cerros, barrancos, colonias. Hemos hecho el trabajo, pero es a petición de padres, a raíz de la necesidad porque vemos que el Estado mexicano no está haciendo algo.
President Enrique Peña Nieto met with them personally, trying to assure the families that Mexico's government is doing everything in its power to find the men.
Tuve oportunidad también de dialogar, de expresarles a título personal e institucional que el gobierno les acompaña, se solidariza con ellos, asume por igual la indignación y consternación que estos hechos no solo han causado en ellos como familias, sino en la sociedad mexicana.
La reunión que tuvimos con el presidente de la República le recalcamos eso, que al parecer que la PGR está enfocado en la búsqueda de fosas, de cuerpos ahí, y eso es nosotros no es el objetivo para nosotros. Esa es una distracción.
Me llena de impotencia y de coraje que si sabemos quiénes se los llevaron, los policías municipales de Iguala, y los tienen detenidos, ¿por qué no les sacan la verdad? ¿Acaso no les pueden sacar la verdad?
Both men blame long-standing corruption among government officials for these crimes.
Al parecer que este país, ser estudiante pobre es un delito. Ser un indígena que quiere superar también es un delito. Hablar, protestar de las condiciones de vida de las normales en México también es delito.
These are some of the last video images of the missing students, seen here tending to the gardens of the rural teachers training school they attended in the town of Ayotzinapa. Weeks before they were taken away, the students spent long hours planting flower seeds in their school's fertile farmland. Their classmate, Jose Solano, says all of the missing men came from some of the poorest mountain villages in Guerrero, which is among Mexico's most impoverished states. Solano says students from the school have a history of confronting government officials and demanding social justice. As a result, he says, they have faced several violent attacks. Ramirez takes me to see a monument dedicated to two of his classmates who he says were killed by local police in December 2011, Gabriel Echeverría de Jesús and José Alexis Herrera.
Porque se estaba pidiendo el nuevo ingreso de 140 matrículas para la escuela. Y lo que hizo la policía ministerial y la policía federal, así como los antimotines, a asesinar, ¿no? A disparar, a quemarropa y a asesinar a estos dos compañeros. Lo podemos ver que
Then he brings me to a mural of this school's most famous student, Lucio Cabañas, who led an armed rebellion against Mexico's government in the 1970s. Cabañas financed his guerrilla forces with ransoms from kidnappings.
Son nuestras ideas, ¿no? Que hemos seguido, ellos nos han enseñado mucho a no estar agachados como estudiantes, a no agacharnos, a no estar con el gobierno esté encima de nosotros, nos esté pateando, nos dé la espalda, no. Las ideas de él son levantarnos, no agachar la cabeza, levantarnos y exigir lo que nos corresponde. Muchos de
The poor condition of their dorm rooms indicates that this school has long lacked government resources. And their classrooms are missing the most basic necessities, including chalkboards. Jose shows me the school's gardens to see how the crops the missing students planted are progressing.
Entonces aquí estaban trabajando ellos cuando fueron a botear allá en la actividad. Y cuando les desaparecieron aquí fue su último día que estuvieron aquí los casos.
The physical effort they put into planting the seeds is now paying off.
Sí, es muy bonita, es lo que se hace aquí, eso es para el Día de Muertos, ¿no? Hay que sembrar para que esa fecha pues se saque a vender y el poco recurso que se obtenga es para el beneficio de la escuela.
No matter what happens to the 43 missing men, they will be remembered for leaving behind this field of bright flowers. Back in the Mexican capital, Omar Garcia has come to this monument built in 2011 when the Mexican government was engaged in violent battles against drug traffickers. These plaques at the base of the monument show the names of a few people from other regions of Mexico who have also gone missing.
Estoy viendo 28 placas aquí de gente desaparecida o gente asesinada por buscar a sus familiares desaparecidos. Tenemos miedo de que nosotros también pasemos a formar parte de esos asesinados por estar buscando a nuestros 43 compañeros.
He looks up at this towering structure, which cost the Mexican government $95.5 million, and wonders how much of that money could have been spent to improve security in Guerrero. Then his mind returns to his classmates, and he says the crops they planted at the Ayotzinapa teacher school have become symbols of hope.
Los padres de familia quieren cosechar ellos la flor de cempasúchil, de terciopelo, el frijol, el maíz que está sembrado. Ya no los han expresado. Quieren cosecharlo porque sus hijos lo sembraron. Y nosotros estamos de acuerdo, también queremos cosecharlo nosotros. Pero qué mejor sería que ellos regresaran a cosechar lo que sembraron.
Clinging to that hope, Omar Garcia will return to Guerrero State. It's a 4-hour bus ride, and he'll spend much of it making plans to pressure Mexico's federal government to solve the case of the 43 missing students, one way or another.
Our political analyst Laura Carlson joins us now from Mexico City to discuss this story and all the details. Laura, welcome to the show. Who are these students and what led to their disappearance?
It's important to know who these students are. They go to the Ayotzinapa Raúl Isidro Burgos Rural College, and this college has a long history. There's 16 of them in the country. They began right after the revolution, and they're founded on revolutionary ideals of social equality and combining an education to become rural teachers with the values of the peasant society in which they work. So these students are, generally speaking, very poor. They're from poor families, most of them in the area in Guerrero, some of them from other parts of the country. And many of them are indigenous. Many of the parents now who are grieving and searching for their children only speak indigenous languages, especially the women. And this was their way to become someone in the world, to get out of the poverty of the small-scale farming in the region and to become teachers. They are also very democratically oriented within the school. There's a student council that makes all the decisions, and they have a long history of social protest. They have protested Peña Nieto's reforms package, especially the education reform, which actually would affect them directly in terms of their access to jobs after they graduate and in terms of the type of curriculum they'd be looking at. And they have also demonstrated in other ways. In fact, they were getting ready to go to the demonstration to commemorate the October 2nd massacre of students in Tlatelolco when they were attacked.
So this all happened in the city of Iguala. The mayor of Iguala was on the run for a while. He has now been arrested. What has been his role in all of this?
Well, according to the Attorney General's investigation so far, the mayor of Iguala, José Luis Abarca, was actually the mastermind behind the detention and the possible disappearance of the students. I say possible because it's clear that he ordered the attack on these students by the municipal police, and then the municipal police delivered the students, according to this version, into the hands of the organized crime group Guerreros Unidos. The mayor is also accused of being in collusion with the organized crime group, along with his wife, whose family and she herself are named as operators of Guerreros Unidos in the Iguala area. So this was a major point in the investigation of the crime. It also lends a little greater credibility to the federal government investigation, because there was a lot of suspicion about the fact that they allowed the mayor and his wife to escape after the crime when it was clear that they were implicated in the attack on the students. Now that he's been detained, the big question will be, what will he say in his declarations? And of course, the biggest question will be if he has information or if he gives information that can lead to the discovery of the 43 missing students.
Laura, authorities have found several mass graves in the area, but none of the remains so far belongs to any of the students. So what does that say about crime and violence in Guerrero State?
Well, that's been one of the big factors in this case, that what we're seeing is not only the abduction and disappearance of 43 students and the murder of 3 others, but also it's opening this case up in terms of just how bad impunity and violence is in the state of Guerrero, and by extension, very likely in much of Mexico. The first graves that were found were supposedly the students, and to tell you the truth, we don't actually know for sure that they're not yet, because the government did come out and say that according to their analysis, these 28 bodies that were found there, a shocking fact in itself, were not the students. However, the key is the Argentine forensic experts, and they have not weighed in on this. In the meantime, as you mentioned, other graves have been dug up with remains. There's a dump outside of the city of Cocula, which has been implicated in the crime of the disappearance of the students, where more bodies were found. And the community police of Guerrero, who've come down to help the parents look for their children, have also found graves. This particular crime is shocking. It's 43 college students, but disappearances, forced disappearances, murders, and a complete lack of follow-up by the justice system is regrettably common in Guerrero and in many other parts of Mexico as well.
And this is one of the poorer parts of Mexico. Is inequality a big issue in Guerrero?
It is, because it contributes to the history that led to these attacks as well. Guerrero is one of the poorest states in Mexico, and it's also a very indigenous state. Many of the people are peasant farmers. and they traditionally have gotten the short end of the stick in any type of development model that Mexico has had to date. And they haven't taken that laying down. So what Guerrero has is a deep and long history of both poverty and intense social inequality combined with resistance and frequent uprisings. That has led to repression on the part of the government. This isn't the first massacre we've seen in Guerrero. There have been a series of massacres. Most of them are not fully investigated, starting with the dirty wars in the 70s, when there were guerrilla movements after people became particularly frustrated with the lack of change and social justice in the state. It gave rise to guerrilla movements, and of course those were forcibly put down in the state, and that led to the dirty wars in the 70s. So since then we've seen this pattern recurring in Guerrero, and in some ways the students were part of that. They were not part of a guerrilla movement, but they were part of a movement that rose up and that continues to rise up, and now even more so in some ways, to demand more social equality, to demand more opportunities for youth and for poor and indigenous populations of the state.
And many people have been angry at the Mexican government, saying that it hasn't done enough and that the president took too long to respond. So why did it take so long, and what are some of the concerns that President Enrique Peña Nieto has?
The short answer to that is that the president seems to have been much more concerned with damage control and his public image, especially his international image, than he was with responding to the crime of the 43 missing students and the 6 people executed, 3 students and 3 other persons. By the police forces, by all indications. So his first response was to shunt it into the local sphere by saying that this is a problem that the state has to deal with, and not realizing the implications that it had, or the fact that it was going to spark clearly such a massive movement throughout the nation, and now, as we see in many other parts of the world as well, for justice, and reveal such a very dangerous and corrupt situation that Mexico as a whole is living through. So by the time that he tried to rectify that error, which was over 10 days after the crime itself, and began to get the federal government more involved in the investigations and making declarations about no impunity and other promises to the community, he had already lost a great deal of credibility with the parents and with the movement. It's been surprising in some ways, but also not surprising, that the demonstrations that we've seen, which have been 50,000 people and upwards in many parts of the country, have immediately laid the blame on the federal government, as well as the local and state governments, obviously. The demonstrators on October 22nd walked into the Zócalo here in Mexico City with cries of assassins and dump Peña. So what they're saying is that whether the federal government was directly involved, and there's some indications that the army was at least very close to the crime and did nothing to stop it, the fact of the matter is that they have allowed a situation to exist in Mexico of impunity, of injustice, and of corruption of politicians by organized crime groups that led to this crime and has led to other crimes, as we know, since the war on drugs started in particular throughout Mexico. The population is fed up with the violence and with the corruption, and this case of the 43 Ayotzinapa students in some ways was the straw that broke the camel's back in terms of their tolerance for a situation that has really come to be intolerable.
Political analyst Laura Carlson, thank you for your insight and your perspective.